No, because we talked about it today. Give me 2 minutes. He's pulling up right now. Yeah. Mike Burke. John, do you know about Patricia? She helped me. That's what I'm trying to see. You're right here. You're gonna have to take that off. Sorry.
Good evening. I'm calling to order the special joint meeting of the Sonoma City Planning Commission, the Climate Action Commission, and Parks and Recreation and Open Space Commission. Welcome to those of you who are in attendance, and I can't really recall another meeting like this with as many people. So with a challenge to our clerk for the meeting, I will ask for a call to order and a roll call.
Commissioner Barbos,
Here.
Commissioner O'Gorman Jenkins. Oh, she's not here. Commissioner O'Neill.
Here.
Commissioner Willers.
Here.
Commissioner Wyrick.
Here.
Commissioner Dombach, or Vice Chair Dombach. Here. And Chair Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Nugent. That's what it was.
Here.
Yeah. Commissioner Heineman.
Here.
Commissioner Nickel.
Here.
Commissioner Ward.
Here.
Commissioner Clemens.
Here.
Vice Chair Conlon.
Here.
Chair Morrell.
Here.
Chair Donnelly,
Here.
Patricia Cullinan, Commissioner Tolbert,
Here.
Commissioner Mellinger, not here, Arborist Meserve,
Here.
Commissioner Mizuraka,
Here.
Commissioner Perez Allen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me remind those of you here tonight to use your microphones. This meeting is being recorded. We're also going to be on Zoom, and so we may have the interaction with the public. We want everyone to hear this, and we want, with review of the meeting, the public to be able to hear everyone. Yes, Natalie?
I just want to note that all of the wireless mics have a little bit of a delay. So before you start speaking, so anyone except for the people sitting up at the computers, just wait a second and then start talking.
Okay, thank you for that. Don't forget to push the button on your microphone in order to activate it for those of you with non-wireless mics. We we'll have the first order of business, as usual, is comments from the public. These comments would be for any item not on the agenda. As most of you know, and those in attendance probably know, the subject of this meeting tonight is trees and canopies and all things related to it. So any comments from the public on items that are not on the agenda would be welcome at this point. Do we have anyone with a hand raised at Zoom?
There are currently no hands raised on Zoom.
All right, well, we'll move on to the next item, which will be to discuss the city's current tree programs and policy issues and the roles of the different commissions in the implementation of these programs and policies. And at this point, I will ask staff to give us their report.
All right. Thank you. Jennifer Gates, Community Development Director. So tonight we're going to do a brief presentation because the majority of the meeting is to hear from you all about trees, we're calling this. So trees provide an economic, aesthetic, and environmental benefits to our community, and all three of your commissions have a vested interest in trees. And so the idea behind this meeting is for all of you to come together and hear from each other and help identify how we want to move forward. And that could be a multi-pronged approach. It doesn't have to be one thing. So I'm going to give just kind of a brief summary of the report that I had and then some next steps. So with that, what was attached to your staff report included the actual ordinance that exists today for our tree permit process. Also, a heritage tree ordinance that hasn't been updated since the 70s. May want to look at that. And then also our climate action strategies, which was just adopted by the City Council last week and has items in there in regards to trees. And so again, all three of your commissions have that vested interest. So we, being the chairs of the different committees, had an initial meeting to talk about this meeting and how we wanted to move forward. So there was initial ideas proposed from the chairs to talk about what needs fixing, what's working, what's not. And so what was identified as goals for improvement included a more proactive approach. We feel like sometimes it's been more reactive to requests for removals of trees or other aspects. A development of an urban forest management plan was raised. Our last tree inventory was from 1994 and potential for updating that, as well as the update to the city's tree list, which would include appropriate trees for specific locations, identification of unique trees that we may want to preserve. This is something that was identified in the ordinance as an option, but was never fulfilled. Also, updates to our tree removal permit with clearer findings, replacement factors, enforcement, as well as a simplified permitting process to facilitate compliance. I think a big thing that came up with the process for removals is actual enforcement of installing a new tree as one of those. And the last thing I wanted to mention was also the need for education and information sharing on tree pruning and responsibilities. I've gotten multiple calls actually recently of who's responsible for this tree, where the trunk is versus where the branches are and things like that. So just the need overall for more education. So what we're asking for from the commission members tonight is to go commission by commission. We'll have Climate Action Commission go first, and then we will have the Pros Commission, and then we will have Planning Commission go last. I'll ask that each chair actually call on their commissioners. But what we're looking for is your ideas, your thoughts about improvements that are needed. It could be some specific aspects of maybe the existing tree ordinance, or it could be broader topics that we want to make sure we look at. We gave you some examples in the staff report of an urban forestry management plan. What does that look like? It could be a specific thing that we need an arborist on staff to help us implement our regulations. So it's all out there on the table for you. We are going to keep track of what we're looking at. Right now, we're looking at, based on the things that I provided to you, there's kind of three buckets. One about education, one about more policy related, and then I would say there's another one that's really focused on the trees. What are the species? What are the regulations that we want to do around not necessarily regulations, but how we want to implement an urban canopy and looking at kind of that broader picture that's specific to trees themselves. With that, I will hand it first over to the Chair Barnett to open to public comment, and then we'll proceed.
Thank you, Jennifer. Is there at this point any public comment before we get into commission comments? Please give your name and make your comment.
Yeah, hello to all. It's Dave Mahoney, Bocce Sonoma Court Maintenance Administrator. Big hat, no cattle. I want to thank you, the Public Works, for the problem we had with the dangerous trees that lined the top of our petanque and bocce courts over at Depot Park. And while we are safer, we're not safe, because John Meserve had designated 8 of the trees for removal because we're worried about interior rot existing. And those trees, I marked them with paint, they still have limbs, about a ton each, extending out over bocce courts and petanque courts, and the passageway that cuts between the bocce and petanque courts going north. People stop at our bulletin board, they're on a bench, they're playing either side. These limbs are right over their heads, and they're attached to trees that are designated for removal, and they're interior rot, and those things could come off at any time onto anybody. So we'd like that revisited, just to lop off a couple more branches. We asked for permission that day. I was there for each day of the process, and John Meserve asked for the permission to be given to the tree service company, who were very good company. And his request was turned down, even though we had everything right there, all the equipment, and I don't understand that. The specs were what they are, but these were outstanding. So I'm asking, please, can you revisit, get the tree company out there to take off the dangerous limbs that still exist? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Natalie, do we have anybody on Zoom?
There are currently no hands on Zoom.
Okay, let me just outline the way we're going to proceed. I'm going to recognize the chair of each of the commissions in succession, and that chair will then take over calling on the members of that commission who might wish to speak on any of the issues that have already been outlined by Jennifer Gates, or any other issue that hasn't been outlined by Jennifer Gates, because the objective tonight is to get as many things on the table as we can. Don't worry about the size of the list or the specificity of the list. That will be winnowed down in an ongoing process going forward. So tonight's kind of a bit of a brainstorming session on this topic. Don't be shy about speaking up, and don't worry about whether or not the item you have in mind has to go to a top of a list somewhere. Everything's going to be aggregated together and then reviewed, and we will come back in a subsequent meeting at some point to review a priority list. So at this point, I will start with the Climate Action Commission, and Mr. Morrell, as chair of that, if you could identify your commissioners as they want to speak and conduct that portion of the meeting.
Thank you, Larry, and we understand we're going to shoot for about 20 minutes maximum. We may even be more brief than that, we'll see. As part of developing a climate action strategy with a focus on the word action, we identified trees for sequestration as an important element of our priority process. That ended up in some interesting meetings with other commissions that led us to this evening as we looked at options to really start taking action. I'm not going to be focusing, at least my comments, and I suspect that's true of most of our commissioners, maybe all, on the existing tree ordinance and some of those other details that really fall more probably under the Pros Commission, but potentially under the Planning Commission. We see key trees at the Climate Commission as a key element of greenhouse gas sequestration. Just to remind everyone, we have in this city adopted a goal, a target of greenhouse gas net emissions in 2030. That's 6 years. We have a long way to go. We have a number of issues that we'll probably get to that go beyond trees before we're done tonight. But with respect to trees themselves, before I turn it over to the Vice Chair and our other commissioners for further comments, I wanted to share a couple of elements that are on the table already as we begin to move from passing a climate action strategy document 5.0 last week or so at the council to where we are now. I'm pleased to be able to announce tonight that CAL FIRE Urban Forestry Program has agreed to fund some new tree planting on the grounds of Sonoma Valley High School. There's a particular area that is irrigated, that is fenced. Students and one commissioner, our youth commissioner, may want in a few minutes to say more about this, have offered at the Earth Care Committee to do the planting. We have the money for the design and for the acquisition of the trees. So we can look more at that as a model. It's unclear at this point whether that first effort, we have about 30,000 square feet to play with inside the fence line, whether it'll be a full green pocket forest, sometimes known as a Miyawaki forest. That does not mean we're planting Japanese trees. It means that there was a particular professor in Japan who created the concept. It's possible. We're talking to experts to try to make sure the funding will cover that. If not, we will be planting regular trees on the grounds of the Sonoma Valley High School. I also wanted to be sure everyone this evening, both here and on Zoom, knows that there's a part of the city of Sonoma that's not immediately attached. It's on 7th Street East. It's called Sonoma Garden Park. It's managed by the Sonoma Ecology Center on behalf of the city of Sonoma. And that particular area, the Garden Park, has a significant nursery. It's called the Sonoma Valley Native Plant Nursery. For those who want, I brought some materials this evening. And from the director of the nursery, I have some information. In 2023, that is last year, we sold and donated over 1,300 plants. We have the space and capability here in Sonoma at the Sonoma Garden Park to grow at least 3 or 4 times that number. So that's an opportunity for us to move forward with respect to trees in Sonoma at the Garden Park, as well as the new adventure about to begin in the next month or so at the Sonoma Valley High School. Last comment before I turn to the Vice Chair sitting to my right is that we had looked seriously and continued to look seriously at a park on the west side called the J.E. Carter Park near Friar Creek, which has a great deal of open space. It has irrigation nearby. When Oriana Hart and I previously with the Public Works Department, has now moved on, looked at the site, we felt it was a potential very strong opportunity for a significantly sized Miyawaki green pocket forest to be located at that area for extensive greenhouse gas sequestration, fast growing, and so on. So that remains a target possibility on the west side. Let me turn now to Tom for his comments and then to our other commissioners on the Climate Action Commission.
Thank you, David. Great to be having the opportunity tonight to discuss this. I have some specific line item comments about the draft ordinance. I'll briefly summarize those right now. I want to first, though, state that the reason that the Climate Action Commission is all here tonight and at this table is because we have a climate and biodiversity crisis that it's a charge of our commission to bring that before you. And trees, of course, help us deal with both of those things. But to do so, we must properly value the existing trees that we have. It's important to remember that on the historic situation, our carbon stocks, the amount of carbon sequestered in the trees of the Sonoma Valley as a whole, watershed limits to limits, was probably much greater than it is today, even though the distribution is a bit inverted. The indigenous people who used to live here burned the valley floor. There weren't a lot of trees on the valley floor historically, but there were a lot of trees and mature old growth oak forest which is now replaced by vineyards that tend to be turned over every 15 to 25 years. So we have a different adaptation to the landscape. Only time will tell if our adaptation is as successful as that which was of the people who lived here for 10,000 plus years before us. But I want to contextualize our comments and our thoughts tonight around that. We know we need to more intensively manage the trees that we have for their shade, urban benefits, their aesthetics, to mitigate the fire and other hazards that have been brought to us by the public tonight, as well as for their aesthetic and carbon storage benefits. So an inventory can give us a good baseline for where we stand, and we're going to be working on that collectively. But this ordinance and these incentive programs, the carrots, to combine with the sticks that might be out there to encourage good behavior and proper outcomes, that's going to be what we're talking about tonight, and hopefully we can make progress on that as a group. Also, I think it's important to remember we need to have consistency with our partners at the county level in the unincorporated area, which of course is in the middle of a update to their own tree protection ordinances. So some of my specific comments will talk about harmonization and consistency, frankly, for the community of professionals that we're going to be relying on. We don't want to have neighbors complaining about the rules being different on the other side of the street. We've seen that before. We want to try to minimize that where it makes sense to do so. That said, our protections should be data-driven and effective and not arbitrary. And I think in the past, the document that we've been living under has had some good things, but there's a lot more data, a lot more science available to us now, so we can make better policy as a result of that if we take the trouble to do so. So specifically, I have some additions to the purposes. Sequestration should appear in our purposes statement, as also protecting bird and other wildlife habitat. In our definitions, I'd like to see consistency in the metrics, the measurement, the units of measure that we use. Right now, the definition, for example, of a significant tree is in feet, but there's no definition of what a foot is. But there is a definition for what a diameter is. So I'd like to see just diameter breast height in inches is the common metric. We should probably standardize that in our code language, just for simplicity. The non-intrusion zone, the table is probably obsolete. The table that says how far beyond the trunk of the tree we should be considering. There's good practice now in the county's draft ordinance to say 1.5 times the tree canopy, and that's probably going to be a consistent metric that most people would like to see. And then I'm confused, and I hope this will be elucidated tonight, how the significance of a tree may differ on whether it's on private property or public property. I don't see the need for that in the definition of significance. I'd rather see that be very explicit. This is what's private, but significance is not modified by private ownership. The county's using a 6-inch max diameter breast height trunk size that kicks in, and this ordinance appears to say, I think it's 1.5 feet, or effectively in circumference, and then I figured it out, it's about 17-inch diameter, which is strikes me as needing an explanation if we're going to have a much more relaxed protection ordinance than the county around us has. I can go on. I don't want to take more time. But those are the gist of my comments. Oh, one final thing on technical. The trunk currently it's only one trunk, but oak trees oftentimes have multiple trunks. And does that mean a tree that has 17-inch single trunk is less valuable than a tree that has two 16-inch trunks but a much bigger canopy? That doesn't seem to be properly captured in the current language. But I look forward to hearing from the rest of my commissioners tonight too. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to all of that.
Thank you, Tom. I'd be pleased to call on our other commissioners. Amber, would you like to start the process?
Thank you all for being here and doing this all together. This is incredible to have everybody here committed to bettering our community. I'm looking, is it working? Okay. Is it working now? Thank you guys. I looked more at broad strokes, just looking at this, all the examples that Jennifer sent us, thinking about it from the public too. And a big part of what we were looking at from the Climate Action Commission when we created our draft was that we wanted this to be interactive with the public. And looking at other cities' examples for their tree ordinances and the list of their important trees, whether that be heritage, whether it be significance, whatever they wanted to label them, it's very interactive. It's very easy to navigate, and I've seen other cities where they have a map, and you can click on the map and find a tree, and you can email a tree that you love. That'll take a while, but I thought it was adorable. So I think we should make this an interactive thing because people do care about trees here. And if we have something more than just this raw data, which is very important, but having something beyond just a PDF document with a lot of technical data, if we have something that people can pick up and easily look at what the ordinances are and easily find and click a button to contact somebody if they're having an issue or want to learn more about the native species in the area. I think that's what's going to make us really successful and really make our plan thrive. I didn't really have anything more specific. That was just, I think, our most important start. Make it interactive. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. Alan, would you like to go next as part of our commission commentary to start it off this evening?
This is an important science of how trees exist in a town setting, and I'm certainly not qualified to talk about that, but many people are, and it's dependent upon climate, it's dependent upon soils, compaction, all kinds of things that can affect these trees. So, if it was up to me, we'd be having different kinds of trees. So I really don't have too much to say. But thank you.
Of course, and thank you. Let's turn next to Philip, and then we'll go to Kendall after that.
No, I have really nothing else to add other than it's remarkable that we can have so many people together to talk about this important subject.
Thank you, Philip. Kendall Clemens, our youth commissioner.
As Chair Morrell mentioned earlier, I'm currently working on a project to create a safe haven for butterflies and pollinators through native plants and trees that are good for carbon sequestration. And I'm hoping that this sanctuary can serve as a model for the city of Sonoma, as it provides the environmental and community building benefits.
And you're going to be leading the effort to plant some trees in that Sonoma High School area.
Yes, and I personally, along with others, are planning on doing the actual action to plant the trees and plant the native plants and shrubs.
Excellent. Thank you, Kendall. With one final thought, that'll conclude the Climate Action Commission initial commentary. What I'd like to share is that I'm also in touch with the chair of this city sister city commission grouping committee, and they're very interested in the possibility of planting 7 trees, one for each of our 7 sister cities. We're still looking where that should happen, how it would happen, and so on. One of our sister cities, by the way, is Kyiv in the Ukraine, so kind of important these days in the public eye. So that could be a very interesting possibility to further enhance our approach toward the excitement of trees in Sonoma. With that, I'm pleased to turn it back to Chair Barnett. Larry, thank you.
Thank you, David. All right, next we're going to turn it over to John Donnelly, the chair of the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission, which apparently has now adopted an acronym of PROS. Not really sure why we can't have prose without poetry. I mean, I'm a little concerned about the acronym, but nonetheless.
Too late.
We'll settle that at Murphy's later.
Or not.
But thank you, and thank you, Jennifer, for helping us organize this wonderful coming together of these different commissions along with the public to really begin to explore how we can improve our tree policies and incentives, especially to grow the urban forest canopy. I was on the Community Service and Environmental Commission before it split into the PROS Commission and the Climate Action Commission last year. And the tree committee, the city's tree committee, was in-house under that commission, the Community Services and Environment, and now it's housed under the PROS Commission. And I served on the tree committee under both of those and worked closely with John Meserve, our city arborist. And most of that time, in fact, all that time, was basically looking at applications to remove trees in the city because the trees had uprooted sidewalks or driveways or causing trip hazards, and then we looked at some of the replacement issues for that. But it began then combined with the growing climate crisis and knowing that the climate action and the benefits of carbon sequestration as well as many other benefits of trees, I began to wonder why the city wasn't giving more emphasis to expanding its urban forest canopy and taking more positive steps to do that. So this is a really welcome opportunity for us tonight to begin thinking about how we can revise some of the policies and incentives to improve and shift the focus from just maintenance and protection of existing trees to actually growing the number of trees in the city and in Sonoma Valley. One of my hopes is that we can work with some equity issues here and begin to explore. I think we have a wonderful opportunity with the Sonoma Ecology Center, which works through the valley, and they have arborists too, to begin to see how we can look at more broadly at and growing the forest canopy in the city as well as throughout the valley. There's some good opportunities there. If you look at the reason the tree ordinance of the city, it says, among other things in the beginning statement, the purpose of the city council acting under the authority of its power to protect the health and welfare and safety of its citizens and enacting the following regulations is to what? Protect certain trees and to promote the concept of tree protection, but to keep government regulation to a minimum as far as practical. Interesting last phrase. That I think you can see in that purpose statement is it basically excludes any reference to growing the tree canopy other than under health, which of course we now know that climate change is a major factor of health concern as well. So I think that we want to shift to looking more at what we can identify these policies to expand the tree canopy in the city, and actually it's not really, we're kind of behind the curve on this in some ways. There's many cities in the Bay Area now that have already taken steps for this. Now they updated their climate tree list and made them more climate forward looking. Those are available to us, but we just last month, the Bay Nature magazine, which some of you may know, has a feature article about, the title is "The Cities as Cities Heat Up, the United States Department of Agriculture grants $42 million for urban trees around the Bay." And this identifies the major cities, San Francisco, Oakland, Vallejo, Petaluma with its Petaluma Tree Canopy program, what they've done and how they've done it. So we can obviously learn a lot just by looking at some of our neighboring cities have done, and also look at the way in which the funding sources are available for that. So I'm very encouraged that Jennifer has outlined some of the specific goals that we've identified in our earlier efforts. To me, it's one is we need to address incentives that direct how trees are planted in the city so that we avoid what we've seen over and over, that trees are planted in these narrow sidewalk strips between the curb and the sidewalk. The trees are little when they start, but 10 or 15 years later they're big and they're uprooting the the sidewalks, the driveways, and the utilities perhaps. So that's something that could be addressed, but then also look at policies that we can begin to expand the tree canopy. So with that, I'll turn that over to my other commissioners on pros. I'd like to start with John Meserve, if I could, as our tree city arborist and also on the pros commission.
This is so cool to see so many people in one room that care about trees. I'm really encouraged. I've spent 15 years on the tree removal board, because that's pretty much what we've done for all those years, is approve removals without any consideration to planting or reestablishing. So that part's exciting about this as well. So I'm hoping I can be here as a technical advisor for you all. You guys are you're the brain trust. You come up with the ideas. I'll try to keep you out of the weeds. I have a lot of technical expertise. I've worked with probably every city from San Jose to Ukiah in some form or another on tree issues, tree ordinances, the early plantings and the problems that happen. So that's really all I have to say. So I'm hoping I can be of some assistance to you all.
Jessica Mizuraka.
Thank you. Take my mask off. On the Pros Commission, as has been noted, we do a lot of voting on tree removals, and we talk about replacement of those trees. And so I've been kind of doing a deep dive into the city's recommended tree list, which is, of course, pretty outdated. I made a few notes here about some of the elements I think that we should be thinking about in this process together. One is community outreach. That we have all these wonderful resources now on smart tree and plant choices, and we could be educating the community on tree care. I mean, how do we keep our tree alive? Do I actually have to water it? That kind of thing. Do I need to prune it? Actually, one of the ways that we give the community more ownership is to ask them to participate in tree planting. That's part of the Miyawaki method. It gives you skin in the game if you helped plant that tree, especially in your own neighborhood. I'd love to see us bring in Manuel Hernandez from the SEC, arborist, restoration manager. He's sort of a savant about trees, just I think the more science, the better. Also educating residents about what's expected of them in regards to the trees that they use to replace trees that we allow them to remove. I think that the UC Master Gardener material that the SEC shared with us and even has a climate forward tree list for Santa Rosa is a great jumping off point for our list. I think we need to talk about how is our region different from Santa Rosa. The other thing is we need to add medium to large stature trees. As John Meserve mentioned, I read in the tree ordinance that unless otherwise approved by the review authority, tree replacement shall occur on site and shall at a minimum occur at a 1-to-1 ratio and a 15-gallon box size for each 6 inches of tree diameter removed. So I don't even think we've been keeping up with that. So we need to start thinking about larger trees and maybe adjusting that part of the ordinance. That's all I have.
Mr. Tolbert.
Thank you, John. My comments will just echo what the other commissioners have already stated. And first of all, the 3-foot planting strip is just woefully inadequate. It may have been a good idea at the time when it was enacted because it provides a buffer between the sidewalk and the street, but it's not enough room for trees to flourish. Secondly, the replacement requirement it doesn't match. If we're removing a tree that's maybe 30, 40 years old and replacing it with a 24-inch box tree, it's so far behind and it's going to take so long to catch up that maybe we need to adjust that to additional trees. If you remove one large tree, you got to replace it if there's room, of course, with additional trees. And then finally, is if a homeowner is replacing that tree, there should be follow-up to make sure that the tree is properly cared for while it's young, so it actually gets established properly. And those are the 3 points I would bring.
Thank you. I don't see Patricia Callan here, and David Mellinger, our student youth member, is not here, so I think that concludes the pros presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Well, now we'll get some comments from the Planning Commission. Let me just start by saying that the discussion of trees has taken place in this community for many decades. I think the shift in the discussion, and it's kind of represented by what's happening here tonight, is the recognition on the part of the general public and for people who specialize in looking at living systems, is to look at the interrelatedness of trees and the other living systems of which they are a part. There was a time in Sonoma, and I think our old ordinance reflects it, for example, with the size of the trees that be replaced or the replacement formulas and the rest. It really reflects an outdated view of the role of trees in our lives. They tended to be thought of in the past in a more aesthetic sense. Trees were nice to have. They were pretty. They're a good place for nesting birds, was about as far as it went. I think the change now is the connection of trees to carbon sequestration, the whole highlighting of the climate changes that are taking place around the globe, the effects of hardscape and asphalt and creating hot zones within cities. All of these things now touch on areas of planning commission work and the work of these other two commissions in areas that really wasn't considered before. I think it's great because I'm a big advocate for looking at things from a living systems standpoint. We are, after all, as human beings and animals, part of a living system. And I regard the health of our living systems as essential to the health of all the animal species and life on Earth in general. It was the plants, after all, that came first. And without them, we wouldn't have ever arrived. I'm speaking of animal life. I think that we've heard comments so far, which I would echo about the planting and care. I think we need a much more robust public education system. When people buy a home, they should be given a pamphlet or a brochure that explains what the city's policies are towards trees, how to take care for your trees, and the regulations that pertain to it. I think your comment about really almost the subordination of the idea of regulation in the existing ordinance is further illustration of the way trees were thought of in the past. I think we actually need to rely on greater regulation as pertaining to our trees now. I'd like to see us consider trees not just in the public right of way or affecting the public right of way. I'd like us to look at the feasibility of regulating trees in backyards that are significant. And I think the whole discussion needs to include a broader look at the tree canopy in the city without respect whether or not it's the street or the streetscape that's affected. It's interesting in various parts of Sonoma, for example, on the older east side of town, which was planted longer ago. If you look down a street, you don't really see the houses. Everybody here is kind of concerned about houses and how houses look. But the fact of the matter is, if you get in the middle of the street and you look down, say, a street like Patton Street, which is around the corner from me, you don't see many houses. What you see are trees. And it's the trees that form the streetscape in this city, generally, and can be improved. With regard, I read a comment in the paper by Sandra Lowe, who would like to see more trees on the west side. Certainly that would be an excellent idea. But if you go up into, for example, the Robinson Road area and that whole area in that north side of Sonoma that's between 5th Street West and Highway 12 and north of Spain Street, what you see are some significant trees. The most significant trees actually are along the bike path around 4th Street and a little further down, you've got some older oaks that are still there. But most of the trees went in when those housing developments went in. And when those housing developments went in, the development standards was that all the dirt was excavated and what was brought in was compacted fill. And that's what the houses were built on. And the trees that were since planted on that fill have no healthy area for the roots to go. That's why on the west side, the tree canopy and the tree sizes are is so different, and they are stunted because of the soil preparation and the no attendance to what the long-term health of a tree requires. And so we've got to, and someone else mentioned the preparation. We have got to do a really in-depth look at changing our regulations or requirements for tree planting. We have to think not in terms of just what's suitable from a drainage standpoint of the housing that gets built, but what's suitable for the long-term health of a robust tree that needs to have room for its roots. When there's no room for the roots, you get surface roots, and it causes problems of all sorts. Those are my basic comments at this point. And I would love to hear what our commissioners have to say. I'll turn it over at this point to our vice chair.
Well, my first comment is, trees are key environmental species and ecological species. And from the points that were already brought up multiply here, I echo that we need them for the aesthetic, for our community, we need them for our ecosystem, and we now need them for climate change. And when I read the Climate Action Committee's recommendations, it's a fantastic document. And I actually think it could serve as the basis for us implementing changes to the code moving forward and kind of coordinating the efforts. I'll try to keep this brief and kind of go to the point, but I feel that with regard to our current code, it does need to be revised. I also believe it is not user-friendly, and so I'll get to that in a moment. But the other thing that troubles me is how we really enforce these codes. I walk around a lot, and I'm often hit in the head by trees. I see the trees on the street that are dying or pushing up the pavement, and I do believe that part of the action that should take place here is to enforce. We heard a comment about dangerous trees, and this should be a priority in our community to take care of the trees, especially when it comes to risking people. So I would like to see us having a really clear enforcement effort as part of the proactive plan, and fund that effort. But and including that would be what is the status of our sustainability coordinator? Part of what the city struggles with is resourcing. And there may be an opportunity to not only have staff, but maybe have the Climate Action Committee take on some of that heavy lifting for the city to make sure that we actually are enforcing things. And so I basically have two focus comments. One is for us to define a proactive approach and the actions that we're going to be taking to move forward with these ordinances and these goals. I actually think that the CAC C-2 goals are a beautiful way to start. They're very clearly written. They talk about cool corridors and really coming up with a strategy of where we want to plant the trees. So I think coming up with that strategy for the city that will maybe fall under the urban forest plan is very important. I talked about enforcement, and we really do have to follow through. It's in the code, we're supposed to enforce, but I don't think we really do enforce things. And then as we talked about before, we need to educate the public in a fun way, make it easy for them
You know, I went to Petaluma's site, which is a great site, and there are tiles that you just click on the tiles. So the easier we can make it, the more approachable we can make it for people. I love the idea of skin in the game. The more we engage people, the more they'll know. I'll just say that I lived in San Francisco for many years, and the Urban Tree Forest Group would come, plant a tree, put a big green water bag around it. When the water bag was empty, no one filled it, and the tree died. And you know, you have to water trees 15 gallons a week for the first 2 years. I mean, there's a method that you have to do to sustain trees. So this education piece, I think, is huge. And I think, again, we should have a web presence. We could have links to other web content that's already out there. Santa Rosa has nice content. I do think there's an opportunity for SEC to participate in that and to help support them to do that, as well as the radio station, which is subsidized by the city. And the second major comment is, as we look forward, is to really develop this urban forest management plan. And that includes, again, the tree list, the inventory. It also includes the Tree City designation. I mean, to really show that we're committed to doing this. And then this whole tree planting strategy for the city, I think, would be very important. So I support the things that you've come up with. I think, again, it's a very good guideline for what we can do and how we can move forward to change parts of the code or update parts of the code. Thank you, and I'll pass it on.
Thank you. I think we'll start here on the dais. Ms. O'Neill, would you like to make any comment?
Yeah, I have a few comments. For those of you that remember the hillside development proposal from 4 years ago, and the removal of native oak trees that is part of that proposal, well, that project's going to be coming back at some point and will be going to City Council. And at that City Council meeting, the appeal meeting, I actually wheeled in a 15-gallon replacement tree so people could see what that looked like. Brought it into this room, and they were talking about taking out some very large old trees and replacing it with this 15-gallon tree that I could wheel in with a little red wagon. So I do think our replacement policy is woeful, and I think that that has to be addressed really quickly. So that's one that I have just a huge concern with. I planted that tree in my front yard. It's an apricot tree. It's not very big still, and it doesn't give me that many good apricots, but I just wanted to make sure that I had a sense for how these trees grew over time. Another one that really bothered me in the city of Sonoma was about 3 or 4 years ago on 3rd Street East, the Kennard property. The buyers of that property decimated all of the trees in the backyard. They took out everything. And not only did it have a huge impact on our canopy in the city of Sonoma, but it had a direct impact on the adjacent neighbors who had purchased their properties with these beautiful tree backgrounds, and all of a sudden there was nothing there. They didn't need a permit, they didn't need any permission from anybody, and they weren't even kind enough to have a discussion with their neighbor. So that backyard tree policy is something I think that we absolutely have to incorporate. I think we just open ourselves up for the lowest common denominator if we don't have a policy there. Dangerous trees, let's take care of them right away. I mean, there's just no call for that, and the liability associated with that is just mind-boggling. I was in the plaza one night during Farmers Market where a tree branch crashed, and fortunately it was right after a manhole cover had been blown off by a girl in the fig, and so the people had run over to see that, and then the tree branch dropped, and luckily nobody was there when it fell. But that one was unknown. Trees can be unknown dangerous, but when we know they're dangerous, let's just get on that one right away. Love the Sonoma Gardens, and I do wish we could incorporate further out there growing large fruit trees for the public, and tapping into people that could help create the funds for that, but also the maintenance of it, because that's an area where we know that they can get maintained. I'd love to see trees on Broadway. I'd love to see trees on West Napa. For those of you that haven't been, please go to Sacramento. It is known as the City of Trees. It's one of the top 10 urban forests in America, and it's amazing how hot Sacramento is, but you can walk down those streets in the summer, and with those canopy of trees, it's really quite comfortable. So I really encourage you to take a look at Sacramento. They also have their bike paths in the right place. They have them next to the sidewalks, and the cars are parked in from there. So go to Sacramento. It's got some good things to see. We lived in Tokyo when my daughter was little, and her school would always do a tree scavenger hunt, which was a really fun thing for the kids. And they had a book and they had pictures of different trees, and the kids would run around looking to find the trees, and when they would get the trees they could mark it off. And if we can incorporate something like that in our education, it was super fun for the kids. There weren't as many trees in Tokyo, and most of them were in the cemetery, so it made it a little easier. But it was still a fun thing for kids to get out there and get engaged and see what they could learn and what they could find, and a way to, kids have energy. They want to run and see things. They don't want to just sit in the classroom and see them. And last, I want to thank Kendall. It's awesome that you're here. And I'm so pleased that there are high school students that are taking this on, and that you're the bridge to the high school community. So I just really want to give you my respect and my appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, would you like to add some comments?
Sure. I have heard so many good things. I'm pretty enthused about what I see happening with the support for urban forest management plan, growing and valuing our tree canopy that we have. I do think there are some equity issues, not even outside the city, but in the city. There's just a whole lot more trees on the east side than there are on the west side. And there's no reason for that except for the bad soil that Larry mentioned. But I think those things can be dealt with. But I think we really need to put a concerted effort into growing the canopy and getting community buy-in. And I also think that there should be some, and maybe it's out there and I don't know about it, but I'll use myself as an example of what not to do. 38 years ago, we bought a lot on Patton Street and built a house. And I always wanted redwood trees, so I said, I'm going to put some redwood trees right here on the side of my property, right next to the driveway. Well, those redwood trees are like 100 feet tall now. And I went out to measure them today because I wanted to see how they stacked up to the significant tree definition, and the tape measure won't go around them. I mean, they're huge. And the thing is, one of them so close to the street that after the fires, particularly, PG&E went wacko on cutting this huge notch out, and it looks atrocious. So now we either put up with that or cut it down. But really, that was a avoidable problem because we put the wrong tree in the location. So I think informing people, my wife says, well, isn't there regulation? They keep people from planting these things? What were you thinking? And so she's got a point, but I think it would be good to have some guidance as to what trees go best where. And there's a lot of those, the median or the sidewalk planting, terrible. You get either poked in the eye when you walk by the tree or scratched. I mean, they don't belong. They ought to be something lower. But we really need to pay more attention to what people are planting and where, and give them some guidance, and maybe when they, as part of their building permit, there's something that could accompany that. I think maybe somebody already touched on that. Encouraging people to plant trees would be great. I don't seem to need any encouragement. I have way too many trees. But there's a lot of people that could really benefit by having some trees in their yard. And I love the involvement that kids had in the example that Sheila just gave us. But our replacement tree policy is woefully inadequate, as shown by the wheeling in of the replacement tree in a little red wagon. We really need to get serious about replacement trees being of reasonable size and quantity if we're going to even begin to make up for the loss of a large tree during the lifetime of the occupants we're not, the long view is a little too long at the moment. I think those are my comments. I agree with just about everything everyone's already said, so I'm not going to repeat those things. But I think this is a great event, and we may have another one, I understand.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll now move to the other part of the room. Therese, would you have any comments?
Yes, thank you. I don't know if you've all had the pleasure of reading Commissioner Barnett's musings on Facebook, but he writes these fabulous stories about the living systems. And I have very much enjoyed. You need to follow him on Facebook if you're not. But they're really, really wonderful, very thoughtful, and I find them fascinating. So his stories on trees and living systems, you got to find him on Facebook. Having said that, much of my comments echo Ms. O'Neill. I hear on a daily basis from a consumer standpoint, what can I do in my backyard? Can I get this tree out of here? Is this going to make a difference about when I want to put in my ADU? Can I get this tree out of here? So educating the population, I think, is very key from that standpoint, and just make it easy for them to get that information. Tree replacement, huge. The opportunity to remove trees without going through a process, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Other than that, my comments, echoing others, I'm in agreement with this, and I love that we're all together talking about trees and green and new life, and it's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. I think in the same vein as what everybody's talked about, it's neat to have all these commissions together. I know I tend to look at our issues in a vacuum sometimes, as though they don't intertwine or interact with one another. And having the commissions together that focus on environment is great, because these things don't exist in a vacuum, and they all affect and impact each other. If by a proactive approach, that can mean a city-sponsored effort to actively plant trees, I'd be all about that, where it's appropriate in city parks and city-owned property. I think that's great. An urban forest management plan. I read I skimmed the urban forest management plan that's contained in the staff report. I think it was from Encinitas, and looked at some others as well. And what a great guiding document. I mean, here's something that kind of codifies and in a cohesive and a comprehensive way puts into one place the things that we care most about as it relates to trees and vegetation and landscaping and our environment. Much in the same thread as what other people have mentioned, let's get on the same page about what trees are street appropriate, and provide some education. We've talked a little bit about enforcement and the how important it is to enforce these things, but let's focus on education as well, and some easily accessible way for people to know what to plant in the first place. Maybe had Commissioner Barbos been able to access some resource that the city provided to know what would be appropriate trees within a couple feet of the sidewalk to plant, those redwoods wouldn't be there today. Hire a contract certified arborist to work for the city. It seems like that need's kind of been established, and I think that's a good idea. And on those comments, I will rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Mr. Willers?
Thank you, Chair Barnett. I wear a hat in the community as an architect, as someone who builds, and so I approach this idea of trees in our landscape and in our environment as something that, from a synergistic standpoint, in terms of how they relate to the development of a community and the development of a city. And what I mean by the synergy is how can we go after the tree ordinance, but also find synergy in the other development ordinances so that we support the tree ordinance in development, in other words, the hard things that we build, so that we can make room for the green things that we want and let the green things do positive impacts on the hard things. And I'll use an example because it was interesting to me to do a little bit of research. If we put down in a parking lot, we put down 1 square foot of asphalt. We need 1 tree on average to grow 2 years to replace the carbon that's in that asphalt. So put that in the context of creating parking lots, creating whatever, creating concrete. When I built our house, I calculated how much carbon was in, we have concrete floors, how much concrete is in the concrete floors. And I attempted to plant trees around our property that in 30 years would offset that. I got a lot of trees. I'm going to be woeful in 30 years, but I tried. And then the other synergy is the location, the appropriate species, planning for their location. Street trees are great in terms of heat island effect, but the trees need to be the right trees. They need to have the right canopy, and they need to have the right space. And a lot of communities have gone through the process of selecting trees that will do well in larger bays than 3 feet, but because they have root habit that will allow them to coexist with sidewalks and that kind of thing. But we have to pre-plan for that. And saying a planter strip is great and that we want trees in the planter strip is really cool, but if it's an ultimate failure, then we haven't done anything because we're going to cut the tree down. And then in the idea of an urban forest, natural forests have a succession. They grow, they start as immature things, they grow, they select species, they grow to a mature species, and then that forest declines and turns into another forest by replanting itself. In the urban forest, we should plan the same thing. How much longevity do we want out of the urban forest, and how do we plan for that? Because ultimately that will benefit our greenhouse gas sequestration. If we plan an urban forest that needs to get cut down every 30 years because we planted it wrong, then we're not doing ourselves any good. And so, I see those synergies between the developed world and the natural world as something that have to come together to accomplish these goals that the Climate Action Plan has in it, which I think is a great touchstone at every decision that we make going forward. So thanks for your hard work as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Willers. I think that's all the Planning Commission members we have on. Thank you for attending, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
I want to go back and touch on a few items that I haven't heard and just get them on the list. One of them is the heritage tree ordinance. We have a heritage tree ordinance which was intended to essentially preserve a given tree because of its significance. We only have one heritage tree designated, and it's at the Sonoma Garden Park out on 7th Street. It's sometimes referred to as grandmother. It's an enormous oak, valley oak, and it is a magnificent tree. But I will tell you that there are other magnificent trees in the city of Sonoma of equal stature and significance that could also be designated as heritage trees. The problem that we have is many of those trees are on private property. And when you designate a tree as a heritage tree and basically dictate as to how that tree shall be maintained into the future in perpetuity, you are basically tying the hands of a property owner and saying, this is going to cost you money, and it's going to cost whoever buys this house money, because this tree is going to go beyond the owner, the present owner of the house. That notwithstanding, I think the heritage tree program is important, and if designed correctly can work. What it's going to require is funding, like many of the other things we're talking about here. And so the question comes up, because ultimately the byproduct of this enterprise is going to be going to the city council with some recommendations as to policies, goals, and approaches that they can use related to trees in the community. So what we're doing is coming up with a list of recommendations, essentially. We don't have the power to make law, we only have the power to recommend. So when it comes to heritage trees, if we want to expand the heritage tree program, it's going to, from my point of view, have to include providing some level of funding for the maintenance of trees on private property. If you're going to say to someone that has a 400-year-old oak that's 75 feet wide, 75 feet tall, and is equally wide, with a circumference around the trunk of 4.5 feet, and you're going to dictate the maintenance and care of that tree to be done in a particular way, in a professional way, the city has got to come up with some way of helping to fund it. You can't tie the hands of private property owners in that way. And I think succeed in communicating to the community the importance of a program like that. So one of the things that we have to look at is how we can restructure the funding for programs like that. Now, I'm going to make a comment here, which I'll make to the city council, I guess, when the moment is appropriate, but I'll make it here just to set the stage for it. We have various revenue generating methodologies in the city, and we allocate those funds the way we'd like. When I say we, I mean the administration and the city council. The TOT that we collect in the city, which is a prodigious amount of money, and based on at least some current decisions, probably going to increase anyway, because room rates go up. You know, Sonoma, the Sonoma Valley Inn with Best Western is being converted to a Hilton Tapestry, and the room rates are probably going to more than double. Well, that's not necessarily good for finding an inexpensive room in the city, but it is going to double the room revenues from that particular property, and that's going to increase the TOT. So perhaps the policy we may want to recommend is that a portion of the TOT, let's call it 0.5%. The TOT is 13%. If we recommended that one half of 1/13, whatever that number is, be devoted to tree programs. I'm not going to suggest the heritage tree program, but other tree programs to offset the cost of basically being assertive and proactive in a tree planting, tree maintenance, and tree preservation program. That's essentially a political decision in part, not just an economic decision. City council sets the priorities. If it decides it wants to put a 0.5% of the TOT or 1/26 of it to preserving trees, it can make that decision. That's within its power. Nothing's cast in concrete except sidewalks. So this is an opportunity for us to think about things that, you know, would require changes in some economic structures and priorities for the city. I don't want the process to stop tonight. In a way, maybe tonight is just a way to have started you all thinking about this maybe in a different way than you've thought about it before. Which means if you have an idea that comes to you tomorrow or tonight in a dream, you can email Jennifer with that idea, and it can go on the list, and it can be something we can consider going forward. There's no reason why this has to be all mapped out here tonight. And I had a discussion, I'm on this parking subcommittee with Mr. Willers and Mr. Wyrick, and we were looking at new regulations the other day and talking about parking standards and how we recover some land that otherwise would be dedicated to concrete for parking cars by changing the square footage allocated to a parking stall. And turns out that there are some things that can be done there. It relieves the opportunity and creates the opportunity for median planting strips and all other kinds of things that can add some green, not necessarily big trees, but can add some green. And so here's an example of essentially, as it pertains to EV charging stations, as it came up in our conversation, which actually requires more space for a car and the attendant charging station than you currently allocate to a gas-driven automobile. Am I right, Mr. Willers? Yeah, and yet the extra space that is devoted to the EV charging station, ironically, can be used for other than concrete. It creates more opportunity for planting strips. So this is what I was talking about earlier, about the interrelatedness of a living environment to the built environment, and the way things are connected now in ways that we never did really think about before, and some of them are unintended. I don't think the state intended to create planting areas through its new EV regulations. But the fact of the matter is, inadvertently, one could say, that's what they have done. So if you come up with other ideas, bring them forward. We didn't touch on the notion of the inventory or the tree list. I don't think it's because anybody here objects to updating either of them. I'm not really sure what the mechanism to do that would be, but I certainly support that. And we did touch on the issue of enforcement, and we may have to suggest to the city council that added funds go to the enforcement if we really want to see that changed. And so our recommendations may be more than just about trees themselves. It may be about the structures that are associated with maintaining them and planting them. Okay, any other comments? What about the public? Do we have a gentleman here who has joined us. Would you like to add some comments?
Hello, my name's Peter Gallagher. I realize I'm from talking to my neighbor Todd Lanningsley. I'm outside the city limits, but I do have a 125-year-old oak tree in my backyard. And when considering what you just commented on, I would ask you to not necessarily grandfather it into the next homeowner. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mike, you've been sitting there patiently listening to all these great ideas to increase your workload. Did you have any comments you'd like to make?
Is this working? Yeah. Other than that, it's been said many times tonight. And for those of you that don't know me, Mike Berger, Public Works Director. Jennifer, excellent job getting this together, along with all the commission committees, working with her, and hats off to Climate Action for doing what they've done so far. This is a great thing. It's a stepping point. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there's some stuff, some tasks that can be accomplished right here in our near future. And we talked tonight about a couple locations where we could start doing our tree garden forests. And we have a lot of different ordinances that have to be addressed. And there's a lot of other ordinances that aren't tree related that have to be addressed. And so trying to figure out how to prioritize them and get it done and make some progress. I think it's all good. And like I said, this is our starting point, and I look forward to the future.
Thank you, Mike. Let me add one point, which is, as you think about all this and your priorities and the reality of staffing and budgets, I've often felt that one of the great assets existing in the city of Sonoma is our engaged citizens, and many of whom are in particular fields quite expert. And so if you think of things that would be helpful to you and helpful to this process, calling on, I think, the various volunteers, and what we're sitting in a room here full of volunteers who may be capable and interested in a particular project, like an updated inventory or a tree planting list. We don't have to saddle you with all this work. I'd like to offer my services, and I'm going to be presumptuous enough to offer the services of anybody who's sitting in here, that they're prepared to help you assemble the information you need to have, to develop the technical specifications you need, whatever else that comes up to help you in Public Works implement the ideas that have come up and ultimately may be approved by the council. I think you've got a fabulous resource in this room, and that's utilized at present in the way the system allows it to be utilized, but can be utilized to an even greater degree. So I hope you will keep that in mind. There's people here who would love to participate in any way they can and bring their expertise to the table.
Yeah, I concur. I think it's a great idea.
Okay, great. And I hope you all don't object to my volunteering your time. That's what happens when I run a meeting. Yes.
Larry, I'd like to follow up this very interesting discussion by a specific request, suggestion, where we've had a bit of a puzzle between the three commissions as to who's on point, who does what, and perhaps get us into an ad hoc grouping of some kind that would fit within the charms of the Brown Act and so on. This is specific to the potential for a Miyawaki forest on the west side of J.E. Carter Park. Was one of the ideas that came out of some early climate action discussions. We had the idea that maybe the Climate Action Commission isn't the right place to be planting a forest, that maybe that ought to be the Parks and Recreation and Open Space Committee. So my old friend of years ago, Dr. Donnelly, and I had a little chat, and we put an ad hoc group together and got a little bit crossways with the way things work in the modern world. So I'd like to propose tonight at least a discussion about what's our next steps to think about this. Should we do it? Where should we do it exactly out there? I have some ideas on that. Oriana had some ideas with me before she moved on, Mike. And kind of critically, who's in charge to make this happen? I'm a big believer, as a former manager and occasional still manager at a senior age, that we need somebody in charge to make things happen. So I'd like the group to discuss, if you like, how do we structure ourselves to move forward with that idea, get it funded, get it happened, and get it excited as a model for elsewhere, including on Montini Preserve, lots of other places, but let's get one going first.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to actually turn this question over to Jennifer and see what ideas she might have about it.
There we go. Okay, sorry, just waiting for it to start working. So a couple of things. One is in the Climate Action Strategies Plan, the Milwaukee Forest as one of our strategies. Climate's going to take the lead in the sense of we're going to talk about the strategies, remember, and we're going to prioritize at this next meeting, which is February 14th. Then we're going to take that and we're going to present it to pros with the idea of which parks after talking to staff. And so we'll work on that aspect. That being said, I think there is an opportunity, like you were suggesting, for ad hoc committees that are cross-commission. I'm going to recommend it, and then I'm going to double check that I can do it. But I see three main categories that I've put into three words: plant it, regulate it, and educate about it. So those were the three categories I was thinking based on our conversations, and I've kind of created a list. And this is what I'll be kind of separating in our notes is all the things that we've talked about. Some of them have been like goals. Those are overarching goals around all of these categories. But some of the subject that we've talked about is how do we increase canopy coverage? How do we regulate it? How do we develop policies around it? And then how do we educate about trees and doing outreach, community outreach and things like that? And you can tell by the comments that we've heard tonight that people have specific interest around those topics, right? So that is an opportunity that we could do potentially tonight, and then I can just double check that we're all good and give those lists of to everybody that's here. We'll present the minutes early on what we've heard from everybody. And we could do little ad hoc committees and kind of prioritize within those three groups and then present back. That is an option. Or we can present all these options to the chairs of the different committees and have a quicker turnaround in the sense of these are all the ideas that were presented, allow the chairs to meet, prioritize, do an initial prioritization, and then present that to you so that we could get to council quicker. I will let you guys converse on that. So the options are create ad hoc committees now, get a little bit more detailed into the different groups, and then come back, prioritize, and send on, or we just compile the list, prioritize that list using the chairs, and then present that on to council, and then council, because the key right now is to get in before the budget starts, and the budget process will start in April, May.
I would opt for whichever of those two approaches is faster.
I'd just like to weigh in here too. I appreciate your suggestions. I'm looking at the goals that we had listed here, and it seems to me that the first thing we need to do is get a city arborist on a permanent employed position and not rely on a volunteer, because I think the easy low-hanging fruit here is first to update the 30-year-old tree list and then inventory, and in doing that, identify where the good locations are for future plantings of trees. This is important because all the USDA grants to all these cities in the Bay Area had to be justified by going to underserved areas in those communities. And if we can identify that, including the valley, I think we could stretch it that far. And I think we really have, once we have the inventory, we have a tree list that we can update. We already have a good example of these climate forward tree lists from the UC Master Gardeners program, and we can identify it for this area. And I think that we can also, take my note here. So we get the tree list and get the locations, and then go to the urban forest management plan, where we definitely need arborists, and we can look at other cities' urban forest management plans. And out of that falls the issues of education and enforcement and funding. So how you structure the ad hoc committees to do that, but that's how I think about it. That's how we can go forward fastest, because we need to get those updated tree lists, and we need to have the tree inventory, and then look for the funding that will support it.
Am I correct, Mr. Morrell, that the Ecology Center is still doing GIS work?
Yes, in a somewhat lesser way than a number of years ago, when Alex, forgetting last name at the moment, moved to work for the county. But we still have, for those who don't know, I also chair the board at the Sonoma Ecology Center. I get confused with the word "we" on occasion. The Sonoma Ecology Center does still have GIS capacity. As mentioned earlier, we have both at the Sonoma Garden Park and on staff with Manny Hernandez and the entire restoration crew the potential to do work. And of course, we're managing Montini and a lot of the Sonoma Overlook Trail, and so there are opportunities for a lot of planting of trees in the right places there. So there's a lot of interaction possible. This again raises funding issues.
Well, I was going to say that, and I may be jumping the gun, but if it were possible to determine broadly an estimate of what a updated tree inventory done with a GIS mapping system what the budget requirement for that would be helpful, and it could be part of our proposal in time for the city budget hearings, because I agree, it forms a linchpin to any tree program to know what we have on the ground already, so.
If we had a written document addressed to the Ecology Center with essentially an RFP, a request for, we could then look at a budget cost to present such a material to the city.
Okay.
I don't know who's the lead on that. Is it pros, or that's part of tonight's discussion, to be sure.
Okay, and Jessica?
I would like to know if anyone here actually knows the procedure by which we could make a recommendation, or some of us could make a recommendation on updating the recommended tree list. Like, how do we do that? Who do we appeal to?
So that's what this is about, is creating that list that we then provide to City Council that they could give us direction to move forward on. They're the ones that would allocate the budget. So basically give us their blessing. I will say that just as a reminder, February 2nd, City Council is setting their goals for next year. So that is a good opportunity to bring up different topics. That meeting will be at the Lodge. And it's going to have a set agenda, and I think I don't know when if the agenda is out yet, but it'll be up on the Civic web. Taking a step back for a minute, we have moved forward with the process to remove the arborist from the Pros Commission, and that would go into effect in a couple of months. We will do a request for proposals because we have specific arborists in town, and some of them do work, so they can't review their own work. So you need multiple people to serve that purpose. So that's one thing. So we are moving forward on that, and that would happen this year. We can always do a mid-year budget adjustment if we don't have enough funding to get through the rest of the fiscal year for that specific topic. And that would be a contract position. And the priority in order, which it sounds like Chair Donnelly has an idea about and does make sense. I would say that all the things that we put in the list, we can kind of organize them. And at this point, just based on what I'm hearing, I'm recommending that we just have another meeting of the chairs to kind of refine that list and make sure what we heard is what you all heard. And then we'll present that list back to all these commissions at the same hearing again. And then you guys bless it, modify it, and then that's the list that we take to City Council.
I have a question about that process, and you'll prioritize topics, but will part of that also be kind of a high-level assessment of what it would take to actually implement, so that there is funding considered? For instance, we have priorities around the plant part, but if you think about education, just at a high level, what would be the basic thing that the city thinks that they would need? For instance, dedicated web presence or web contractor or something like that. And yeah, in year one. And so I'm just asking, when the chairs meet and when you prioritize, will some assessment of basic needs be part of that list?
We would put that part of that list when we do that funding request, for sure, because we would need to know. At this point, potentially not if we're doing this more quickly. In the sense of just prioritization of a list versus the actual cost for each item. Because as we know, there's a lot of things that we need to do. And I think we all have ideas of what that is. I would second that the other part of that recommendation maybe to City Council is that we create the ad hoc committees that are joint commission to help with those specific things. Certain groups that would look at policy and a group that would look at some of the implementation aspects.
Just a question, Jennifer. So if the council is setting its goals February 2nd, will you be presenting the sense of this meeting that we really want to develop this proactive urban forest canopy priority in our tree ordinance?
I think they heard it last week when we talked about it at the climate
Okay.
action strategies.
All right.
And I think there's an interest obviously in the plaza and things around climate as well. And so I think there is an interest. I have still working with the city manager on what, we're going to specifically bring forward, but I think this is where you all can participate as well. It's a public meeting. So, your input is valued at these meetings too.
Yes, Tom.
Just so that I'm clear, so the priority, I'm hearing a priority to, I'm kind of more inclined to follow Mr. Donnelly's framing of the need for the processual and the documents in place and making sure that it sounds like the process that's already underway, which is to formalize the arborist role for the city, those real infrastructural administrative components, that sounds like a priority to me, so that we're able to eventually plant and enforce the regulation and educate the populace. Just so that I'm clear, is the updating of the ordinance on your agenda for this next fiscal year? Is that part of the budget request that we'll be making? And is it our input into that process starting tonight? Or are you intending to kind of take more time? The reason I bring this up is that the county's obviously working on it, and in its wisdom, I use that word advisedly, it has placed a moratorium on tree removal until they can finish that process. So that hasn't come up in our conversation tonight before me bringing it here, but I worry sometimes about processes that take too much time. We heard about the Kennard property as an egregious example of what goes wrong when you don't have good rules in place. And so that's a concern of mine, is that we want to be sure that we are keeping carts and horses in proper alignment.
Mm-hmm. So my response to that goes back to the prioritization and certain things, like you're saying, the cart before the horse before the cart. Which way are we going? I am not an expert on trees. I have a black thumb, and that's what I rely on you all to help me understand, and arborists and those that do, right, to help understand what those priorities are. So that's why we're all here together, is to talk about maybe what those specific priorities should be. But we have a long list, right? And so, being able to cull through that list, really identify, what, this we really need to do in year one. This can wait till year two. If the idea when we come back is this is the order and this is what we're thinking of for funding purposes and staffing issues, that this is the way we want to go, bring up the option if that's the case. There's with any moratorium, there should always be an escape route from that. But I would recommend that right now. I think I'm still recommending that the chairs utilize the chairs to prioritize that list and bring that back to all of you of what that would potentially look like.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I mean, as long as that appendage to our previous conversation is understood by the ad hoc committee that might be formed out of tonight, I think I can be content with that. The one little minor thing I want to be sure gets into the record tonight is there's a document called the Guide for Plant Appraisal from the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers, which gets back to the question of how do we put value on those existing trees. And my understanding is that that's currently a best practices document and one we might want to consider in that process. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any closing comments you'd like to make before we wrap this up tonight? We don't want to leave any leaf unturned.
Okay, you can tell me if this comment's not appropriate, but I just want to remind people about the SBCAC meeting in this room tomorrow night at 6:30. Smart Train will be presenting their plan to bring in 160 LPG tankers to Shelbyville to generate revenue, and Eddie Cummins, the general manager, will be here presenting to SVCAC. So if you have an interest in this hot topic, please tune in or attend.
And Mike, yes.
Yeah, just one more comment. Some of the focus tonight, a lot of the focus tonight has been on planting new trees. Some of the top discussion have been on maintaining existing trees, and also the first year. Super critical from a tree standpoint. Just so everybody knows, one of the things that the city's been focused on substantially in the last year and a half is taking care of our existing infrastructure of trees. And we've probably done 3 of the biggest tree contracts, the city, Public Works, that we've done in recent years. We took on phase 1 in the plaza, and all of the, we did a tree survey with a local company and categorized all the different risk levels. The trees in the plaza had not been maintained, trimmed in quite some time. And we got in there and we took care of all the critical need trees, and we had them in 6 different categories: critical, 5, 4, 3, 2. And we got all the criticals and all the 5s and a lot of the 4s knocked out in our first round of trimming. And that was a challenging job because a lot of people were looking at it. In addition to that, we went up and we trimmed all the trees at Field of Dreams, and that hadn't been done in years. And we took care of some significant routine maintenance that had not been done in a long time. And then also, when we were just up at Depot Park, and the gentleman that was talking about that job tonight, those trees have all been assessed, and we trimmed all of them, and 100% of those trees have been deemed safe. So we understand that there's always second opinions, but we did work with our arborist, and 3 big jobs of trees have been done, and it's all for the health of the tree. Take the dead wood out, make sure that they aren't a public hazard, and make sure that they're growing in the proper directions. So the city's taking steps to preserving our existing infrastructure of trees.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else with closing comments, concerns, ideas?
Just a short one. You mentioned the acronym prose and lack of prose in poetry. We have a real chance to celebrate what we're doing here as we move down, because Ada Limon, our Sonoma treasurer, has written extensively about trees. She even has a podcast about her favorite trees in the Sonoma Valley, so I'd be happy to share that with anybody. But sooner or later, maybe we can have Ada come and help celebrate this. But thanks to everybody. It's just been really helpful tonight.
As a punster, I just have to say that would be tremendous.
Okay, I think we're all barking up the right tree. There we go. Okay, unless there's any further comments, we'll close the meeting. I don't think I need a formal motion to adjourn. So thank you all so much for your time and attention, and I look forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you.